There's no question that being able to load up a synth plugin and build any sound from scratch is one of the most powerful skills that any producer can have. The only problem with that is that the world of sound design is very extensive and can be very overwhelming to learn. So in this video, I'm going to show you the simplest, most straightforward plan that you can use to learn any synth of your choice and start making sounds from scratch today. Wait till you see just how creative you can be when you know how to make any sound. Okay, so before we start, you will need a fully programmable synth plugin. A couple of my favorites that I would recommend is Serum 2 because it's really powerful, Vital because it's free, and Silent because it's simple. For this lesson, I'm going to be using Serum 2, but I'm going to explain everything in such a way that you can apply everything I do in this synth to your synth of choice if you're on a different synth. Okay, let's start. Step 1 is to understand the basics of a synthesizer. The most common type of synthesizer you're going to come across is a subtractive style synthesizer. These synthesizers have three main parts. The first part are the oscillators, which generate a raw sound. The second part are the filters, which start subtracting from the sound. And then there are the envelopes and LFOs, which start shaping the sound or adding movement to it. Now here's what that looks like in real time. I'm going to start with some notes here. I have a set of chords. I love having a set of chords handy when I'm sound designing. We're going to completely initialize our synthesizer here. This just lets us start from scratch. I'm going to make sure we have just one oscillator on, and we're going to use the default sawtooth waveform. So now our synth's going to generate a noise, or in other words, a raw sawtooth waveform. And yes, those are the high on life chords. The next module in the signal path is usually the filter. So now we could turn our filter on, make sure oscillator A is routed to it. I'm going to tighten it up a bit, and now we could start subtracting from the raw sawtooth waveform. And just like that, we just made one of the most popular synth pads in electronic music, which is just a raw sawtooth waveform routed through a filter. It gets better though. The oscillator is where you choose the timbre of the sound. I think that's a word. In other words, you have a lot of choices for what you want this sound wave to look like. For example, this is a sine wave. It has no sharp edges. And it gives you a very warm, focused sound. So when we play this back, we get a really focused frequency band. The sine wave is one of the fundamental waveforms, so get comfortable with it. Here's another fundamental waveform, which is the square wave. Notice the mess of frequencies the square wave generated because of its sharp edges. If we compare that to the sine versus the square, square generates more noise. Here's another fundamental waveform, which is the triangle. Which is kind of like a sine wave but with sharp edges. Let's go back to the fundamental saw. Another thing to experiment here when you're learning oscillators is where it says unison. This number affects how many saw waves are happening per note. Quick pause. I thought it'd be beneficial for you if I shared some of the sounds that I'm making in this video for you for free. So check the description below. I made 5 sounds for Serum and 5 sounds for Vital. Enjoy the sounds. They're a lot of fun to use. Let's get back to the video. Check this out. This is a stereo imager. It tells you how wide or narrow a sound is. This one's called Ozone Imager and it's free. I'm going to bring this unison back down to 1 unison. So now we have a single sawtooth waveform routed through a filter, playing the Martin Garrix high on life chords. See this line right here? This line is telling us that this sound is very narrow. Watch this line as I increase the unison. It's like a confetti party. The unison allows the sound to get wider. So by adding unison, you can add stereo presence to your sound. And I forgot to say, whatever number is showing here on your oscillator is the number of those waveforms that are playing per note. So we have 3 notes playing at once, 10 voices of unison per note, so we're hearing 30 saw waves on top of each other. The last part of the synth we're going to cover in the basics is the last part of the signal path, which is envelope 1. This envelope is where we add shape to the sound. Check this out. I'm going to get my rhythmic chords. Maybe they're different than the high on life chords. They're not different. They're the same high on life chords. Let's say I want something plucky. We can go to envelope 1 and decide the shape of the sound that comes out of the synth. Isn't that cool? We use the envelope to give shape to the sound, or in other words, how the sound behaves at the beginning, during, or after a note is released. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to get really deep into it. But yeah, that's the fundamental signal flow of a subtractive style synthesizer, which is you start at the oscillators, go through the filters, and then shape the sound with the envelope and LFOs. Obviously, there's more to it, but that is a good place to start. Let's get on to step 2. Step 2 is to learn how to make amp envelope controlled sounds. Every synth will have what's called an amp envelope. The amp envelope is usually the first envelope in the line of all the envelopes on that synth. The amp envelope has full control over the sound at all times, and you control the sound by tweaking these knobs under here. These are the ADSR knobs, or the envelope knobs. The fundamental knobs to learn are the attack knob, the decay knob, the sustain, and the release knob. My synth has a hold knob. That knob is less common on most synths, and it's not one of the fundamental ADSR knobs. So I'm going to talk about those. These knobs tell the synth what to do when you press a note, hold it down, and release it. So if we play a chord, by default we get that. Watch what happens if we slow down the attack, or in other words, what happens when the note starts. See how it was slow to get started? Here's a fast attack. Here's a really slow one. The release knob controls how long a note takes to stop after you release it. So here's a slow release. Watch this. Here it kept going. Here's no release. Here's a really slow release. Isn't that crazy? Don't forget to turn on reverb while you're sound designing. This is like the most fun you're ever going to have. Now, sustain and decay are kind of weird because they're interconnected to each other. Decay doesn't work unless sustain is not all the way up. Here's what I mean. So if I press a note, sustain is like the volume of the sustain of the note. But now decay becomes a thing. So if you have a short decay and like a middle of the road sustain like that, the sound will still have a punchy attack, but a lasting decay. You can make it like real quiet. I'm going to turn the sustain off. Let's look at the decay knob. I have a new set of chords here. for inspiration. If we turn sustain all the way off, the sound will eventually end. But when it ends is completely determined by how long the decay is. And by the way, a golden rule when you're learning the amp envelope is don't forget to go back to your oscillator and play around with that while you're shaping the sound. Just because you're working down here doesn't mean you can't move back up here. So if we change this to a sine wave. Isn't that spooky? Let's go up an octave, changing unison. Isn't that awesome? I always thought square waves were pretty useful as well. Here's a cool one while you're messing around here. Go back to that sine wave. Pull the sustain off and make the decay short. Make the unison 1. Then you go to the MIDI effects within your DAW, add an arpeggiator. Every DAW has an arpeggiator. So again, when you're messing around designing sounds, don't forget to move throughout the different modules as you're designing the sound, because you'll be able to learn which modules do certain things, and that'll help you kind of chase the sound that you're going for. So let's reset the synth for a clean slate. So by this point, you're starting to see the world of possibilities with amp-controlled sounds, but there is one more amp-controlled sound that I wanted to touch on, and that is bass. Here's a melody we're going to add bass to. And by the way, we're going to learn how to make that sound in a minute. Let's drag some bass notes under our melody here. The most straightforward bass you can add to any melody or chords that will always work is any filtered sound wave. So here's a saw. We're just going to filter it with a tight filter and focus it toward the low frequencies. See how easy that was? So in other words, any sound wave will work as a bass if you write the bass notes in a low octave on your piano roll and you put a low pass filter on it, preferably a tight low pass filter, and you'll have a bass. Here's a square bass. A filtered square makes one of the strongest sub basses. Here's back to the saw. Saws have a thinner, gritty presence, but in my opinion, are one of the best sound waves to add unison to. Check this out. That's the famous Reese bass, or in other words, a sawtooth waveform ran through a filter with high unison on it. Check this out. Let's go back to one unison. Here's a sine wave with soft edges. I'm going to undo the filter here, and if we play this back, if you're on good speakers, you can feel that, but you can't hear it. This is because the sine wave has no sharp edges, so it produces the most focused frequency band. Or in other words, it produces a pure sub bass. Now there are times when using a silent sub like this that you could only feel is needed or musical. But just keep in mind that if you use a silent sub in your song like this, your listeners will not be able to hear the sub bass in your song, or they won't be able to feel it if they're listening to it through the phone speakers or other flat speakers like laptop and computer speakers. That being said, there is a really cool thing you can do with sine wave sub basses, and that is go to the effects tab or go to your audio effects within your DAW and add color to them with distortion. Every type of distortion that you have, in this case, Serum has some built-in distortions with great sounds. Adding any kind of distortion to a silent sine wave sub bass adds a bunch of character and color to it. So check this out. That is one of the biggest subs you can add in your song. And when you're practicing, make sure to go through all the distortions in your DAW, like overdrives, saturations, and any other type of thing that it might have, and add it to your silent sub. To see what kind of crazy things you can get. Check this out. Let's take a diode. But that's your little intro to basses. Please practice that. You want full control over your basses. In my opinion, I think the first amp controlled sound that you should learn how to make right now is bass, and then expand from there. Let's get on to step 3, which is how to make modulated sounds. Modulation adds another level of infinite possibilities of sounds that you can make. Check this out. Notice how this synth has a bunch of envelopes next to the first envelope and all these LFOs here. And this isn't just unique to Serum, actually most synths will have multiple envelopes and LFOs. The job of envelopes and LFOs are that they turn knobs for you. Any knob on your synth that you want to turn automatically, you can use an envelope to turn that knob once, or an LFO to turn that knob infinitely. Like check out this default saw wave. The level knob on the oscillator is just the volume knob of that oscillator. Now let's tell the synth to keep turning that volume knob of the oscillator infinitely. And that's how you do that on most synths. You drag the LFO or the envelope over the knob that you want to turn either once or keep turning, and that's how you do it. Now there's one modulated sound that I think every learning producer should learn how to make, because you can use this sound for anything. Melodies, chords, bass, anything you want. So it's a foundational sound. Alright, so initialize your preset. Most synths should load you up a saw wave by default with one oscillator on. I have a new melody loaded up here, and it is the Porter Robinson Language, the greatest melody of all time. Here's the sound. We're going to keep a sawtooth wave in our one oscillator. We're going to turn on a filter. Make sure that your oscillator is routed to the filter. Most synths by default will route the first oscillator to the filter. I'm going to tighten the filter up, but this time I'm going to close the cutoff knob. So when we play, we get nothing. I'm going to use the first empty envelope, which is envelope 2. Which does nothing, by the way, until you tell it to do something. I'm going to use this to open and close the cutoff knob at such a high rate of speed that it creates a sound. Now, when we first play this, it's not going to sound much different than an amp-controlled sound, but start enveloping. Let's turn off the sustain. There's that famous electro pluck. Notice this blue line around the cutoff knob. That blue line is telling this knob how far to open up every time a note is played. Watch this. If I start it wide open, we need a little bit of reverb while we're doing this. Come on. This is gorgeous now. So this blue line here is unique to Serum. Every synth has a different way of showing you that a knob is being modulated, but they all work the same way. With modulated sounds, what I like to do is start the sound really deep like that, like really quiet, because then while you're performing the song or when you arrange the song, you can automate this knob to really make the sound come to life. And that's it. That's the sound. But remember, this isn't just one sound. You know how to change that into an infinite amount of different things. Start playing around. Let's go back up to oscillator A. Here's a square. Modulated sounds, by default, have a warmer sound, or tend to have a warmer sound than amp-controlled sounds. So you can take this pluck and then isn't that pretty? It's like my favorite sound in the world. This is just echo. Soft attack. And then because we're here, we can undo that or that modulation envelope, take an LFO, and you understand at this point that the LFO does the same thing, but it just doesn't stop moving. Isn't that pretty? And that's how you get lost in the design. And by the way, all those sounds I just made right there will work as bass, chords, melody, really whatever you want to use it for. But that's my sound design video for you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to get coached by me one-on-one and reach your most ambitious music production goals, you can use the link at the top of the description below. If you would like my feedback on your music, I have a link in the description for that as well. As always, thanks so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video lesson.